So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is a bit of a blast from the past, because as I mentioned in the battle on the old version of Khazad Dum on the old patch, it wouldn't necessarily be the last time we would see this version of Reforged. Indeed, it may crop up a couple more times before it does get consigned to the history books once and for all. And this is one such example of that. This is a free-for-all that was given to me by Y2K on the map Longbottom. And the reason I am doing this one is partially because I need something to fill the schedule, actually, as I'm looking and staring down the barrel at another 3-week trip away, and without such content I will be looking at a more lengthy gap than I would be liking. But also it's because he was quite insistent that this is something that I should take a look at, very close and very competitive. There is also going to be 4 teams, each of which the pair of them have to pick the same faction, and the map for a free-for-all is kind of an interesting one because it's almost King of the Hill-esque, and indeed the protagonist factions here have taken up position on the hill right from the start, which paints a target on their back most certainly, especially when you consider the faction that they are. More on that in just a moment though. And then wide open plains with a few hills around the central settlement in the middle, or central manor house I should say really. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one in terms of the dynamic that crops up as a result of that. We've seen this map in the past a couple of times, but it's been in a classic siege setting, so this is going to be a little bit different. We won't waste too much time on the composition phase here because this is a rather long battle, which is odd for a free-for-all because free-for-alls do have a tendency to maybe take a little bit of time to get going, but once they do, they tend to rapidly reach their conclusion. This one, however, there's going to be a bit more back and forth. Based on the fact that Y2K here wanted me to show this battle as well, I do have high hopes for this one. So let's hope this is one of the last hurrahs of the old patch that we can truly send it off with in a bit of style. But yes, Y2K and his ally Adin Men are both going to be playing as the Dwarves of Khazad Dum today. Just having a quick look around, we have John and his ally over in the far distance, who is... Come on, work with me, there we are. The Warlord playing as Isengard. We have Proxima Centauri and Zelhane playing as Erebor. And... wait. Yeah, Erebor. So Erebor, Isengard, Khazad Dum, and then we have Filler and his buddy Hidden Zed playing as Lindon. So we have an Orcish faction, 2 Dwarven factions, and an Elven faction, all with very different focuses, though the 2 Dwarves, of course, have a little bit of crossover there. But yes, Y2K playing as Khazad Dum, and it does make a certain amount of sense that Khazad Dum, while it is a risk to take up a defensive position like this very early in a free-for-all, it does make sense from a certain point of view, because Khazad Dum is so good at holding the line and so good at digging in that going out into the open field is not necessarily the best idea. But again, free-for-alls, as good as these factions are, if everyone decides to descend upon them, the 2 of them alone will not be able to hold out against 6 armies of equivalent quality. Hammers of Gundabad, though, at the very least, will fight to the bitter end. Locked morale, of course, armour piercing, which is going to be useful against all but one of their opposition today. Same thing can be said of the Dwarven miners, but they, of course, will run away in a hurry. Sentries of Khazad Dum, if you are going to dig in early like this in a siege, you need some pikes or some kind of phalanx unit to back it up with. Sentries of Khazad Dum here allow you to do that. The Mercenary Guildsmen, I mean, you can see the mercenaries from time to time in the Khazad Dum roster, though generally you don't, because of course they run contrary to the stout-heartedness of the Dwarves. The Mercs will run at the first sign of losing the battle, really. They do offer an armour-piercing attack for a relatively small outlay. The Warriors of Khazad Dum, on the other hand, a much more dependable unit of line infantry when it comes to elongated fighting. Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum, of course, an archer unit, which, again, if you're going to take up a defensive position, you need ranged units of some description. More of them over here. And also, there are the more dangerous units. 2 catapults here, and a unit of the Iron Watch of Miramir. Now, I can imagine that, again, picking these kind of units, you really do intend to dig in into a defensive position, because the artillery can, of course, be devastating, but so too can the Iron Watch, and the Iron Watch actually is probably a little bit easier to use, and Isengard will probably look at this and think twice about taking this road. We have some Sentries of Khazad Dum from Adin Men. We have more of the Hammers. He's got more of the Legion units by the looks of things. Obviously 2 artillery pieces and the Iron Watch together are very expensive, so to save a bit of money, Y2K has gone for some of the lower tier units, including the Mercs, of course. Adin Men, however, no such restrictions on him. He can bring the Legion units, the 3rd and 4th Legion, spears and line infantry respectively, very good at what they do. Khazad Dum Reclaimer is another good ranged unit as well, maybe not as spectacular as the Iron Watch, but a little bit more easy to utilise in terms of the traditional way that you would play the game. Perhaps an axe throwers, of course, are very devastating in their own right. We have more of the Iron Watch 2 units, so yeah, he's gone into the red limit here. This is a very odd composition. If they do get crushed quickly by all of the other forces on the field, then Khazad Dum won't last. But if the other factions are hesitant, with 3 Iron Watch, 2 catapults, reclaimers, all of that sort of thing, Khazad Dum could reap a bloody harvest indeed. Meanwhile, Lindon will have something to say about that, I'm sure. Hidden Zed has got Noldorin Guard, 2 units of them, and Noldorin Blade Masters, the high-end, heavily armoured core of Lindon. Of course, this being the previous version of the game, Lindon, still very much in their somewhat weakened state, in my opinion. They are a little bit stronger in the next patch, which is much needed. But here, maybe though, with the unorthodox nature of the Khazad Dum lineup, there's no real being strong against Iron Watch projectiles, so the lower armour of Lindon may not actually be too much of a problem when it comes to assaulting a position. And the Mythalon Marines do offer a bit of armour piercing. Mythalon Swordmasters and Pikemen, obviously unshielded, but both useful in their own right, as even against the Dwarves, of course, Lindon can set up a good pike line, as long as they're not getting peppered from afar too heavily. Horse Lords of Ulmo, Harlingen Riders, so the Knights and the Lancers, and there's also some of the Harlingen, or the Mythalon Lancers over here as well, so Horse Archers, Javelin Cavalry, and the traditional heavy-hitting Lancers. It will allow them to very heavily contest the open field, but maybe less so the summit of Longbottom. Harlingen Guard already in range, as is the Elves want to do. We have more 4 Lindon Archers in behind. Hidden Zed's ally, Filler, has got 4 Lindon Archers as well. 4 Lindon Marines, Javelins, of course, going to be a big factor here, considering all of Lindon's opposition today are going to be dipping quite heavily into armour. 4 Lindon Pikes are a little bit cheaper than the Mythalon ones, but that may not be such a bad thing if late game efficiency is called for. Mythalon Marines, Noldorin Guard and Blade Masters again dipping quite heavily into the high-end units, which is fairly common for a free-for-all. Most people will have the sacrificial first lines, and then later on they try and win it with quality, which is not the worst idea in the world. Horse Lords of Ulmo, Mythalon Lancers as well. Here, furthest away from the settlement, we have Zelhain playing as one of the Erebor armies. Erebor perhaps can most easily go toe-to-toe with Khazad Dum in the infantry stakes, as you would expect. Erebor, of course, have their own pikes as well. Last time we'll see the unshielded variant of them, perhaps, considering they have gained a shield in the new version of the game. Axe Guard of Erebor as well, armour-piercing attacks, useful for all the reasons we've already mentioned. Ironfoot Hammer Guard, very, very strong in melee with other cavalry, and a pretty crunching charge, although they are better against armoured cav. So the Lindon Riders may be a bit of a problem for them, and certainly more agile the Lindon Riders, so stuff like the Javelins may be a problem. Erebor Legionaries and Ironfoot Spears, Ironfoot Warriors, more of a traditional Dwarven force this. Having said that, Erebor, while they do have specialty projectiles, not quite as show-stopping perhaps as Khazad Dum, so it's understandable why Erebor would be a little bit more by the book perhaps when it comes to their army. Axe throwers and crossbows, though, very devastating, and this is the closest thing they get to the Iron Watch. The Blacklock Engineers is still very devastating, but the angle of fire is so important for the Blacklocks, and it needs to be linear, pretty much the exact opposite to the Iron Watch. And it's much easier to use the Iron Watch with their arcing shots than it is the Blacklocks, who, to get the most out of them anyway, you need to have a straight shot. And the Dragon Slayers are here, which is unsurprising, because undoubtedly they saw their opposition and knew they would need a bit of armour piercing. Ironfoot Spears are here as well. We have some Erebor Legionaries, Proxima Centuri here. We have some Ironfoot Hammer Guard. Highborns going for a very high quality force. The bodyguard version of the Sons of Durin, possibly the last time we'll see them as well, considering they've been made merely a very high tier shock infantry troop next time around, instead of just instead of another bodyguard unit. But it's more armour piercing here, and for all the reasons already mentioned, that will be useful. Ironfoot Axe Throwers, good unit for removing an entrenched nuisance. Ballista, again, another good tool for doing that, but much like the Blacklocks, they need a fairly linear shot to be super effective in this situation, although they could snipe out the artillery too. More crossbows, more spears, more legion, axe guard as well, and then some Ironfoot crossbows on the flank with some Ironfoot spears in tow. And finally, the one evil aligned faction on the field today is going to be Isengard, the warlord here. Combination of pikes and infantry is pretty much exactly as you'd expect from Isengard. We have some Uruk-hai crossbowmen in behind, a full lineup of them. Dunlending veterans too. I mean, fairly cheap considering the kind of opposition they're going to be asked to go up against here, but numbers are going to be important for Isengard here. You know, they are going to have to win this by those means. You're not going to be able to out-quality the dwarves and elves, not really as Isengard anyway. You can try and lean more heavily on your armor piercing against the dwarves, and maybe situationally that will work, but for the most part you can't rely on such things. The Uruk-hai archers as well are not going to be enough to win you any skirmish fights really against the kind of opposition here. Yes, Lindon are lightly armoured, but they do more than enough damage to deal with the Uruk-hai. Stuff like the Isengard Ballista could be a real game changer though. Again, Khazad Dum are under severe threat really from this kind of unit. Nazkai in behind, and then also some Warg Riders, a couple of units of them. Now moving on to the final force, commanded by John, we have more crossbows, more archers, Dunlending clansmen. Again, these Dunlanders are in for a rude awakening considering the level of quality that's opposite them. On the battlefield today, Warg Skirmishers once more, Half-Orc Baneguard here in force, Half-Orc Spearguard, Uruk-hai Pikemen, Guards of Orthanc and Nazkai. Nazkai obviously with that armour piercing going to be absolutely vital, and 3 units of Uruk-hai infantry as well. So nothing too out of the ordinary really. It's Khazad Dum have been the most creative, Lindon have tried to bring the most cavalry I suppose, Isengard and Erebor going for maybe a little bit more in the way of conservative armies, but we'll see what plans out here. We will make a little bit of a cut as the battle enters a phase of genuine action, but I don't imagine we'll have to wait too long for that. So not a huge amount of time needed. Indeed, I actually had it on ×6 speed, expecting there to not be a huge amount of action right from the start, but it does look as though Isengard are going to move forward. Interestingly, a detachment of the Hammers of Gundabad not following the rest of the unit, but they will get there, I'm sure. And the artillery also starting to open up very quickly. The Uruk-hai archers, I think this could end up being a good move as long as Isengard don't have to try and leverage the dwarves off their hill all on their lonesome, and I don't think they will, just based on the fact that we do have Lindon over here trying to throw their javelins up and over the hill. A few little kills on the Orc Hunters as well, returning the favour via the mercenary crossbowman as well. Weird kind of situation where the mercenary crossbows actually can kind of skirmish with elven units. And of course there's still the small matter of the completely unmoving really Erebor, allowing everyone else to do the dirty work before they will then attempt to move in and sweep up, the classic way many a free-for-all has been won in the past, but that will only work as long as Isengard and Lindon do continue to push in against Khazad Dum, and they either defeat Khazad Dum outright or do enough damage to where Erebor can easily then sweep them off the hillside. That's the thing about free-for-alls as well, is they will have a tendency to ebb and flow, so I imagine what we will probably see is a lot of tiptoeing around one another for a little bit, and then someone will commit, turn up the heat a little bit on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Lindon poking out from around that corner, but the dwarves not in a position really to take immediate advantage of that. Although I say that, these Orc Hunters could do if they wanted. Ironwatch of Mirrormere shooting. The Ironwatch of Mirrormere actually are probably the only unit. Oof, that shaking though is quite obnoxious when you get close to them. But as I was saying, the Ironwatch are the only unit really which can shoot directly downwards off a wall, in a sense, because of the arc of the fire that those projectiles have. So usually, conventional wisdom in Medieval 2 is that actually putting your army, the entire army, at the base of someone's fortifications is the safest place for them, because archers and projectiles can't shoot directly down off it. That is not the case when the Ironwatch are there. It's one of the worst things you can do then, because you put your whole army in harm's way, and I think Lindon just realised that, because that's a lot of damage that they just took, and indeed a lot of their Horse Lords of Ulmo also died as a result of that, so dominance on the open field may be a little bit harder to come by as a result of that. Our Lindon infantry on the way forwards as well. What are they going to do? Are they going to try and thread the needle? I mean, one singular unit of infantry like this isn't really going to be enough to make the difference. 1-to-1, this would be an interesting fight actually. I think if you were to leave both units to their own devices, the Lindon infantry would just about win it. The 4th Legion Shield Guard can't do quite the level of damage. And also, the Elven melee defense will reduce that capability even further. But the shape of the engagement and the support from the archers means that this is a somewhat polluted example, and the dwarves will hold firm. But then that's the problem with Lindon in general in this version of the game. In very specific circumstances, they can be very, very good. If you're not in those specific circumstances, they can struggle for their price mightily. Dwarven miners being engaged by these Dunlending veterans. And the whiz of the crossbow bolts as well. That'll be a concern for Khazad Dum actually. They don't really want to be on the receiving end of those bolts too much. Dunlanders doing their thing meanwhile. The Isengard ballista bolts, some of them getting wedged in mid-air and destroying an entirety of a catapult unit. I mean, this was something we pointed out, that could be used to snipe out the catapults, and so it has proven to be. The dwarves have spent far too much, I think, on their artillery to allow any more of them to go to waste. The rest of them have, of course, been wheeled off elsewhere. Top of the hill over there. I mean, to be fair, this is a fairly significant committal of units from Lindon, and Isengard are also committing quite a few resources to try and get Khazad Dum off this hill. It's not as if, I mean, we're viewing this replay from the perspective of the dwarves as well, so it's not as if they've got units sequestered away out in the open field. I don't think Khazad Dum actually have units that can hide anywhere, which may be why. But it is kind of all or nothing. They set their stall out, Khazad Dum, and now they're going to have to be prepared to defend it to the bitter end. Pikemen on the way forward. I mean, we don't see Lindon's javelin expertise too much in this version of the game, and indeed this will almost certainly be the last chance we get to see of this variant of their balancing. It's a lot of routing, I have to say. So far, Lindon's morale has not really been the best, and maybe that's because the catapult is right there and there's all sorts of support for the dwarves, so even the mighty elves are fleeing. Javelins are doing their job though. Plenty of kills on the sentries. And the 4th Legion Shield Guard also trundling back into position. Iron Watch getting closer as well there. Lindon will not be too pleased to see them again. More on that later. Over on the other side, Isengard turning up the pressure once again. They're firing in with the Iron Watch. I mean, out of ammunition, Uruk-hai crossbows, there's some Uruk-hai infantry in there. It's only a unit of Dwarven miners that you risk inflicting friendly fire upon. Not the worst thing to lose accidentally. And also the archers are firing in as well. So far, I mean, in terms of who's going to get the highest kill count on the field, I think that's undoubtedly going to be Khazad Dum, just because of the position they're in and the fact that they're having to deal with an awful lot of pressure, and they will do from this moment until the moment they have been defeated. But quite rarely actually does the highest kill count coincide with the winner of a free-for-all, because it's a sign that you've been engaged too much. Catapult's still moving into place, and Khazad Dum reclaimers as well. I mean, throwing axemen are always going to be good against pikes, especially very lightly armoured pikemen like the 4 Lindon ones here. Ithald Marines in behind 2. Harlington Riders. Sort of chip damage is a worry for Khazad Dum though, because of the slow but sure advance of Erebor. Looks like they were planning on holding back for a little longer, but now they're on the way forwards. Be interesting to see what Erebor does here actually. Maybe the other players have lit a fire under Erebor, saying you're going to have to contribute to trying to force Khazad Dum off this hill as well by attacking from the front angle here. Otherwise we're going to peel off and attack you instead. That would be my gambit to them. One of the, actually no, all of the catapults are still active, following the crumbling of one of the others at the hands of Isengard. This is the kind of value that Khazad Dum will be very pleased to see. Are they going to fire? The projectiles are loaded, but they're not firing. Lindon coming forward with a fair amount of pressure once again. I mean, Lindon do fairly poorly in a meat grinder like this. They're continuing to try and make it work. Harlington Riders firing in as well. hunters getting into place. I mean, these Dwarven archers are actually fairly decent as far as damage goes, but again, it's Lindon's big lack of armour which is the problem there anyway. Lancers close enough to the situation. Merc crossbows. Would you rather have the crossbows target down something else? I don't necessarily think you need a whole bunch of range support at this point. Khazad Dum have Lindon bottled up. I think it might be more prudent for Khazad Dum to actually save a bit of ammunition for something else, whatever that may be. Isengard now moving forward following the defeat of the out of ammo crossbows and the infantry. And the Dunlanding veterans moving forward in support of the Isengard as well. Again, more units that are shaken. Mercenary guilds would again will have to zoom back out as a result of that shaking from the Iron Watch. Guilds winning. Armour piercing will be good against Isengard. Sentries of Khazad Dum trundling into place as well. Urukai archers trying to do their thing, and well, I mean, they've succeeded in doing their thing actually against the Orc hunters, who have tried to completely ignore them. Though of course this will result in a lot of damage over time. The Iron Watch will be far harder for the Urukai archers to kill the Iron Watch at Mirrormere. They will get there in the end. Indeed, you can see that some of them have fallen. Another one goes, but it's a slow process, and this does mean that the Iron Watch will have plenty of opportunity to continue to fire more projectiles in, and then of course they can simply be moved out of the way when it is deemed no longer worth it. Erebor still haven't made their grand entrance out of the fog just yet. And this elongated game of King of the Hill will continue until the end, I think. Even when Khazad Dum, or if Khazad Dum get deposed from their position, someone else will have to take up position atop the hill. The best place to defend from on the map. The Elven Archers still trying to do their thing. I mean, Lindon, in spite of the fact they've been repelled twice now, do still have a decent sized army, which is a good sign. It's a sign that Lindon haven't been too over the top in their attacks, and obviously it means they can feign a bit of weakness later on. Try and get the enemy to do something, and Isengard also being thrown off. Under normal circumstances in a siege, I would suggest that attacks failing like this would be a terrible state of affairs, but that's not really the case here, because the attackers have a certain motivation to not commit everything they have all at once. Doing so may result in a straight 1-to-1 victory, but it means that someone else is probably going to be able to reap the benefits in the long run. Still Erebor can't see them looming out of the fog just yet. They are in the distance and they are still making their way over, but a bit of a lull in proceedings now as both Isengard and Lindon have their attacks temporarily ended. Really the only thing for now that is continuing is the ranged pressure from both. And with no reprisal, this does mean that Lindon's damage from afar can start to come into its own a bit. Lindon Guard ballooning their shots high. Fourth Legion. From the front, I mean, this is going to be a very solid kind of unit. Might be worth trying to go after the Iron Watch in behind, to be fair. We've seen the Urukai archers actually have a bit of an impact on them over time, and hitting a shielded and armour upgraded unit from the front doesn't seem like it's going to yield much in the way of value. The few human mercenaries marching with the dwarves today, only 33 of them remain. Wonder how many of those were killed by the Iron Watch. Snarler skirmishers on the way forwards. What are they going to target? There's not really anything of great value here. Don't know if they're going after those. Well, these ballistas certainly going after the Iron Watch, I think. That's also Adin Man's general unit, so he's going to need to move those if he wants them to continue to live. Because at some point the Isengard ballista will find its mark. They are actually managing to hit units that are over the hill from them. 3rd Legion Infantry, so they're getting some kind of value one way or another. Let's go over here. Orc Hunters starting to return fire into the advancing Isengard forces. Guildsmen counter-attacking down the hill into a fresh unit of half-orc spearguard. I mean, surely the mercenaries are not going to last much longer now. They're very depleted, very outnumbered. The mercenaries are not known for their morale. Orc Hunters. I mean, Hammers of Gundabad are on the way, and maybe their morale has rubbed off on the mercenaries, fighting to the bitter end as they just did. Hammers of Gundabad, of course, guaranteed to stand and fight until none of them are left alive. And the half-orc spearguard will despise being in melee against a unit such as them. Sentries of Khazad Dum moving forward. I mean, this is a good opportunity for those Snaga skirmishers though to get some good value. Armor-piercing javelins, ideally placed to do the business against the Hammers of Gundabad. Meanwhile, Erebor have picked up the pace, and very, very quickly actually they loomed out of the fog and are now pressurising the line of warriors of Khazad Dum that are marshalling this position. There's also 4th Legion here. I mean, Axguard of Erebor should be pretty good against these kind of units. It's whether or not they've committed the numbers forward to genuinely test Khazad Dum, or whether this is just a token effort to keep the other de facto attackers, really, at this stage, from turning on them, being seen to pull their weight. The rest of Erebor starting to make their way into place. What's going on over here though? Iron for Hammerguard and the Ballista loitering just in behind Isengard. Now would not be the time for betrayal. The only ones to benefit really from a betrayal this early would be Khazad Dum. It means that they could continue to dig in and watch the enemy fight in front of them. More damage needs to be done to them before any such thoughts can be entertained. Urukai archers getting into melee. I mean, some of the Hammers of Gundabad have pushed their way a long way in behind enemy lines, but it is only done lending veterans and Urukai archers, so even the odds being like this, they will still kill a few before falling. Those javelins have had a big impact on this front line. It's definitely not the melee quality that Isengard have sent forward, but the pikes and the hammers looking a bit thinned now. And eventually, of course, that means that the numbers of Isengard will start to be enough to force the dwarves onto the defensive, and the Iron Watch can't really shoot into any of these units because they're not high quality enough for that to be worthwhile. There's loads of dwarven bodies just dotted around in behind that front line. The balance of forces is evenly matched. What have we got back here? Have a Lindon reignited their attack yet? Not really. Indeed, the archers have also fallen silent, although I don't know how much ammunition they necessarily have left, but Lindon thinking about moving forward now, I think. Out of ammunition for Lindon archers, will that be enough numbers-wise to force the 4th Legion into a retreat? I mean, with the addition of Mithlon Marines and such that are actually built to go into melee, maybe it will. Helms and infantry also coming forwards. What have we got here? Catapult moving into place. Erebor pressurising another front line as well, but again, Ironfoot Spears, as efficient as they can be as a frontline force, not really when they're up against a unit like the Hammers of Gundabad. Let's see. Further down. Uruk-hai archers continuing to look pretty healthy. I mean, eventually, the domino effect will still come into play for Khazad Dum, even though all of the choke points are being pressurised by a different army, and they're hostile to one another technically. Once one of your positions falls, the others will follow. And that's part of another part of the downside as to why maybe Khazad Dum shouldn't have been so gung-ho about claiming the hill so early. Like I said, it'll lead to an impressive kill count if nothing else, but I'm not convinced from this position that it will lead to a victory for this partnership. Forward comes another unit of pikes. Again, that will be as a result of trying to ensure that domino effect doesn't start, and the unit of warriors of Khazad Dum as well, so this will be more than enough to once again bottle up these units. Lindon and Isengard have managed to force their way fairly far behind enemy lines, but if this is a sustainable push, then this is where things could start to unravel for the dwarves. And the Isengard are not an easy unit to get rid of either. Either you can try and kill them off quickly with maybe an Iron Watch volley or two, but in melee you're not really going to be able to deal with the Noldorin as fast as you may like. Even Khazad Dum don't have the infantry to be able to do that. Armour piercing. It's weird that the Isengard being used aggressively in that fashion. It's the sort of thing you would expect to see perhaps from something like the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Isengard. Victory seems certain. There may only be 55 of them, but these mercenaries, to be fair, the armour piercing will actually come in handy. And now defeat is a distinct possibility. Range support coming in and surrounding the Isengard. So like I said, if this is sustainable from Lindon, it could be problematic for the dwarves, but if it's not, then Lindon may well be throwing away a bunch of their manpower for no benefit. Mercenary crossbows from Khazad Dum, the Iron Watch of Miramir, being assailed by Axguard of Erebor, who were broken as a result of that charge, so the Merc crossbows being used as a melee bludgeon effectively for once. Khazad Dum reclaimers, victory seems certain for them. Ironfoot pikes. There's a lot of them moving forward again. That camera shaking that the Iron Watch causes really is obnoxious, isn't it? But big amount of damage heading Erebor's way. This is quite necessary because with this kind of force, Erebor are going to be able to force their way through Khazad Dum at some stage, unless the Iron Watch and the catapult can do a ton of heavy lifting. And this is because Khazad Dum, of course, have got to split their attentions, whereas Erebor do not have such limitations. 39 sentries, having to block the advance of yet another fresh unit of spears. Khazad Dum don't really have much in the way of reserves at this point. They're committing pretty much everything to the fight. Lindon starting to turn the screw. The Isengard were dealt with, but they gave the rest of the army a chance to set themselves up further back, and territory has been gained. And again, if they had their entire army at their disposal, Khazad Dum may very well be able to stop Lindon's advance, but they don't. Erebor are doing the same sort of thing, and now Isengard, maybe not to quite the same extent as the other two, which is probably wise on their part, but they are also still continuing to attack this choke point as well, sending forward pikes, so it's going to be very difficult for Khazad Dum to do anything about that. Erebor starting to flood over this position. I mean, what are they going to do? I don't think there's much Khazad Dum can do. The Iron Watch being engaged in melee, Erebor legionaries will finish them off. So it's going to be a high kill count for Khazad Dum, but ultimately looking like a loss. I mean, they do still have those mercenary crossbows, but if they get caught by anything, they're going to rout in melee once the rest of the army is gone. And also because Lindon have got a cavalry presence on the field, including Horse Lords of Ulmo, there's not really anything I think they're going to be able to do. trying to provide a bit of relief to sections of the front line which are still fighting effectively. Further in behind, Noldorin. All kinds of Khazad Dum are wavering and broken. So Lindon finally able to start breaking the Dwarven line after that early game punishment they took. These Hammers of Gundabad, of course, will fight to the bitter end. Still those Orc Hunters up on top of that hillock. Still a few units in behind, but again, most of them basic. All of them will be exposed soon enough as well. Mercenary Guildsmen being sent over for more reinforcements against Isengard, which is interesting. It's not as if they're going to be able to break through this area either, though, considering the presence of those Uruk-hai pikemen. What else have we got? Orc Hunters. Still firing at the Lindon advance. I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, they're shooting into the front, though, of the one Lindon unit that can withstand a ton of archer pressure in the Noldorin Guard. And I guess it's hard to keep track of everything when it's all falling apart for your team. Still a long way in this battle to go, mind you. And we're not really much closer to determining who's actually going to win. And you can see, finally, Khazad Dum are not the only target for the various teams' aggression. I think Lindon's seeing that Erebor are now more of a threat. They're going to start using their javelins on them. Merc crossbows, perhaps foolhardishly, charging into the Ironfur spears. As the rest of the army slowly makes its way up the hill. Come the Mithlond Lancers. I mean, the cavalry here in the late game from Lindon could prove to be incredibly useful. One of the Khazad Dum generals finally falls, which they've lasted a fair amount of time, haven't they? The other one is over there. So Y2Ks may have fallen, but Adin Men's still lives. For how long, I'm not sure. I think that, to be fair, the force in the best position here, I think, is actually Isengard. Erebor and Lindon are now coming into contact with one another directly, and the results are precisely what you would expect. Isengard, meanwhile, can content themselves still with a relatively slow-paced fight against what little remains of Khazad Dum over here, and indeed they can afford to send forth their weaker classes of unit. Guards of Orthanc moving in. Well, Lindon assassinating one of the Erebor generals there. That was an impressive catch, because those Dragon Slayers looked fairly healthy. Was that over here somewhere? Yes, it was. Again, the advantage of all of this Lindon cavalry may now start to really come into effect, and indeed, this is the moment to use it, because if Erebor are allowed to dig in on the hillside with pikes and spears, the cavalry becomes less useful. To lose these Dragon Slayers as well, Zelhain trying to keep them back out of the fight and only bring them in later, but this may prove to be their undoing, unfortunately for them. It's a lot of damage the Horse Lords inflicted off a charge, and the Javelins continuing to do so. And that is the kind of quality that Lindon will have been hoping not to have to deal with in direct terms anyway. You can see that Erebor shamelessly trying to dig in at the top of the hill. They joined the fight latest, and now they're going to try and claim the prime location, but considering the fact that the catapults are still firing at them, if Lindon are wise, they will allow Khazad Dum to continue to do that. Do damage to their fellow dwarves, the enemy of my enemy after all. Isengard still have their artillery as well, which is why I'm not convinced actually that this is a winning idea from Erebor. I think they should continue to try and flood over the hillside, and based on the damage both sides took, I would have said that they had the edge over Lindon anyway if it came down to a straight up fight. The risk there is, of course, Isengard, but still, looks like the Khazad Dum catapult is also going to be, well, Isengard may be actually allowing the catapult to continue to do its thing. Again, Again, Erebor painting a target on their back now by having the most defensible terrain of everyone on the field. It's going to be interesting if they are all trying to go up against, well, there goes the other Khazad Dum general, but it'd be interesting if they are going to try and team up against Erebor to not try and trip over one another. Of course, this may be one of the last times we see the body-piercing rangers still in effect, and the Wardens of Alos Tyrion having more damage than most. This is a situation where the rangers could be really useful as well, because all of these dwarves are rather densely packed, after all. Crossbows, though. We didn't really see a great deal of their use earlier on, so that implies that they do still have a good amount of ammunition remaining to them. Cranking the crossbows once more. What else have we got? Ironfoots. Lindon. Rest of these units, I mean, they are kind of getting in one another's way. The rest of Khazad Dum dealt with there. Orc skirmishers now being attacked. Guards of Orthanc. The catapults slain, so Isengard had enough of the playing nice. The hammers of Gundabad still here though, so Khazad Dum, technically it's not impossible for them to win, I suppose. Now Isengard really ought to be in a position of making it impossible. Further along, Guards of Orthanc going after the Wardens of Alos Tyrion, so a bit of a stab in the back really. Is this wise from Isengard? Wardens of Alos Tyrion were going after Erebor after all, and if you're going to allow someone to get damaged, maybe that should have been allowed to continue. Erebor benefiting greatly from this move from Isengard. Isengard's army as a whole starting to make its way forward, still plenty of crossbows of course. Maybe not the same level of quality in melee as Erebor, but still. Lindon will feel that betrayal quite keenly, I think, as they are also, even if it is only a token effort, the only ones engaging with Erebor in melee as well. Crossbows continuing to fire. Going after the right sort of things as well, Northern Guard. Lindon having to deal with an attack from Isengard as well, so Erebor will be absolutely delighted by this turn of events. Swordmasters having to make their way forward, they and the Noldorin Guard. I mean, the Uruk-hai infantry are very solid, and indeed the numbers are such that Isengard probably do have the advantage here, but if Lindon can organise themselves, their quality can still make a big impact. But again, pikes would be one way they could do that, but Isengard are not wanting for pikes either. And now Lindon retreating of their own volition. This is probably the right thing for Lindon to do, to be honest, because Isengard seem intent on attacking them. So if Lindon simply move backwards completely off the hill, maybe the temptation will be for Isengard to turn their attentions to Erebor. I mean, Isengard look like the scariest force, numbers-wise, so maybe this is the motivation that Erebor and Lindon need to join forces. Indeed, the Blacklock Engineers, they're having to arc their shots, which, as I said, they need that linear shot to really be super effective, like the Iron Watch, but it's better than nothing. And of course, each one of their missiles that hit stands a pretty good chance of being a confirmed kill. Blade Masters, 41 of them. That unit must be stretched, because we saw them retreating. Forward come the Half-Orc Spear Guard. So yes, Isengard now turning their attention to Erebor, going to try and peel them off this hillside, and of course they couldn't have stayed in full view of the Erebor crossbows for too long without everything coming to a head, and the Iron for Axler as well. So between the crossbow bolts and throwing axes, Isengard are going to take a fair amount of punishment here, but do they have the numbers to be able to force Erebor back quickly? There's nowhere for Erebor left to retreat to after all, so this either works for the dwarves or it ends in complete failure. What's going on here? Dwarven Blade Masters, there's still blue and green on the minimap. Champions of the White Hand going after the Noldorin Blade Masters. I mean, that's going to be pretty grisly for them. It's routing. I think all of the units are routing. I think Khazad Dum are completely done with. And the Orcs moving forwards, but one of the units of Dragon Slayers may have been bullied by Lindon earlier on, but they have another, and they will be an ideal combatant to help deal with Isengard. Those armor-piercing strikes. Very, very effective indeed. Snaga skirmishers. Choosing a good target in the Sons of Durin. Still the bodyguard unit that they are in this version of the game. Those bolts whizzing past. Maybe not quite as show-stopping as the Isengard ballista, which I don't know where that went. Maybe out of ammunition, or maybe charged down and killed by the Lindon cavalry when we weren't looking. Both are a distinct possibility. Highborns of Erebor are also up front and also up close and personal. They don't have the armor-piercing strikes, but they do have slightly better defensive stats, so it's going to be harder for Isengard to land telling blows on them. This is a lot of punishment that Isengard are taking on the way forward. And indeed it is this which is going to keep them in check. The Dwarves continuing to hold, players admitting defeat, so that must be the Khazad Dum players, Uruk-hai pikemen routing. Javelins being utilised. Close range damage being inflicted here. In come the Uruk-hai crossbows, trying to help plug the gaps of all the routing units that came before them. I mean, in numbers terms, Isengard are still looking okay, but in terms of the realities of the battle, I'm not sure this is great for them. Nazkai moving forward. Unfortunately for them, though, they're going toe-to-toe with the Sons of Durin, a unit very similar to themselves. So it's maybe not going to be the ace in the pack that Isengard were hoping for. Javelins are being utilised by Isengard themselves as well, though, so Erebor are taking damage as a result of this, which can only be to the benefit of the elves at the base of that hill over there. Lindon. Are they going to be in a position to capitalise on this death or glory struggle taking place now still at the top of the hill? After the Baneguard rout, unsurprisingly, again, the rank and file of Isengard kind of out of their depth, really, and that ballista's still in a nasty position as well. Again, this is a sign that Isengard, I think they should have allowed the Elven Rangers and some of the range units to continue to do a bit more damage to Erebor before making this play. Even if Isengard do beat Erebor after all, they've still got to deal with a Lindon force, which by that point will probably be healthier than themselves. The ebb and flow of this battle. The only ones that you would have thought wouldn't have won the battle were Khazad Dum, just because of the very provocative position they took up at the start of the battle, and indeed that has proven to be the case, even though, like I said, I'm sure that they will have a rather morale boosting kill count to their name when we see the splash screens at the end. But now it comes down to the tactical engagements, when to press forward. Some very depleted Dragon Slayers, but of course you don't need to have a ton of manpower to finish off lowly Snaga. Time for axe throwers. So yeah, I mean, Isengard have been completely prized off the hilltop now. Isengard's only hope is to retreat and to hope that the other two go at one another once again. They do not have their trolls, Isengard. This being the previous version of the game, the trolls will not be quite as resilient, so against a lot of the units as well that the dwarves and elves have are going to be able to deal damage quickly enough to the point where the trolls themselves are not going to be match winners without support. Isengard reorganising themselves, but a lot of these units, like the unit of Nazkai in all fairness, that's a nice unit to have in the back pocket. It's the sort of thing that the dwarves will be fairly worried about. Half-orc spear guard, effectively kamikazeing into the dwarven lines there. Horse Lords of Ulmo. Can that Lindon cavalry still be a big difference maker as well? I mean, 12 Horse Lords are pretty strong. They do still have more of them as well, although the Isengard wargs are also in behind. This Harland infantry as well is completely exposed. I don't think Lindon were expecting this, but a good catch. Lindon being punished for their inactivity, as Isengard see it, I'm sure, but Isengard were the ones that first delivered the knife in the back, so there goes one of the Isengard generals. And indeed, I think that's the entirety of one of the Isengard armies, so I think the Warlord is the only Isengard player that remains. Again, a decent charge there. Just trying to whittle Lindon down a little bit. Defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win this battle, allegedly. Horse Lords of Ulmo should be more than enough to deal with the Warg Riders with a bit of support from the other Lindon cavalry as well, but you can see there is now a bit of a Mexican standoff going on. The Iron for Axe Throwers, this is too good of an opportunity to miss, I suppose. Throwing their payloads down at Lindon, and of course Lindon taking a back seat in that last engagement means that both Erebor and Isengard will take the opportunity to launch a few pot shots at them. Between the throwing axes and the Warg Riders, Lindon looks like they're being forced into action here as we enter, or we're getting closer and closer to the final 10,000 frames, and as I said, the Mexican standoff, the dwarves probably with the best defensive position. They also have that artillery. Isengard may be looking the most battered and bruised in terms of the quality of their units as well. Maybe it's bound up in a few units individually, but then Lindon have the cavalry as well, the Noldorin. Ones of Elos Tyrion are still alive, so this could go either way still, either of the three ways. That ballista is wasting an awful lot of his ammunition, however, by hitting that Hobbit Smiles. Axler is moving back into defensive shape as well. In fact, I think what we will do is go up to ×2 speed here, or even ×6 actually, as the players make up their mind on what they're going to do. Allegedly, that must... wait, was that... Did Y2K have one guy left alive here that was stood there the whole time, and those trolls just squashed him? That's crazy. I mean, that wouldn't have been enough anyway to win the battle, but still. Survival by stealth and all of that, still. Back to ×6 speed it is. Who will make the first move? I mean, it's interesting here, because whoever ends up making the first move in earnest probably is the one to lose the battle in many ways. Is this going to be it? Do these Uruk-hai crossbows still have ammunition? Looks like they do. They've got their crossbows drawn, and unlike the next patch, the crossbow doesn't double as their melee weapon as well. Hits being landed. The crossbow duel. I think an understanding has been reached here by Lindon and Isengard. I think they understand that Erebor's defensive position in the presence of the artillery and the quality that some of those dwarven units possess is such that they need to assist one another in removing the dwarves from their position, which of course is bad news for Erebor, because if that alliance holds, the dwarves will not be winning this battle. Doesn't really matter what they try and do, they will be overcome. But these alliances are fragile things. These Ironfoot crossbows have chased the enemy a little too far, trying to prevent the Warns of Tyrion from getting into a good shooting position. They will, as a result, be surrounded and destroyed. Further up, Ironfoot crossbows. Still, the defensive line is in good shape though. Trolls. What is that? One unit again? These Trolls of the White Hand have been charging into individuals, knocking their own crossbowmen out of the way. Still those wargs loitering around as well. The Lindon cavalry being used, those Ironfoot crossbows. Not a huge amount was gained as a result of that. You can still tell that everyone involved is tiptoeing around the fact that inevitably someone is going to need to show some boldness. Urukai crossbowmen on the way forwards as well. Warns of Tyrion going to get in position to try and use their body-piercing projectiles again, perhaps. Some of them have still got their blades drawn, but I think they still have ammunition. Are they going to go out? Surely it's Erebor. Cavalry and Lindon. Erebor were going to move forwards a little bit, but now they've been forced back once again. Lindon taking the opportunity to try and kill off this depleted unit of Ironfoot spears. At this late stage in proceedings, every little helps. Further back, the Wardens in a good position to fire now. Crossbows. How much ammunition do they have left? Could be a fairly decisive factor late on here. Still have a decent amount of quality in melee here as well, Erebor, but Lindon's starting to make the initial play. Isengard will be pleased by that sight. Again, they're the ones that could end up claiming the benefit for that. But we've seen this before, and Isengard attacked Lindon maybe a little bit earlier than would be ideal, but maybe at this stage in proceedings it's, if you commit everything into an engagement, maybe through sheer martial might, you will be able to see yourself through. Still a fair amount of these Noldorin units. Oof. There goes a Lindon general, a Dwarven crossbow bolt, pinning him in the back of the head. Still, it's those crossbows. Crossbows, it always seems crossbows have got a solid amount of ammunition at their disposal. Over the long haul, they can be such an asset in this kind of situation. And now Isengard have made their play once again. Lindon on the receiving end of some Uruk-hai betrayal. But it was inevitable, this, when Lindon took up these positions and took the lead against the dwarves. Maybe Lindon are relying upon their Noldorin quality to be able to finish off both Erebor and Isengard, but I think that's a big risk to be taking. Nazkai getting hit by the cavalry. Trolls are... It looked like the Trolls were almost running away from that cav then, which is not what you want to be seeing. as Isengard's Nazkai. I don't think the Lindon cavalry is not in high enough numbers to be able to sustain this. Isengard looking pretty good here in this later stage. Guard defeat is a distinct possibility, unfortunately for them. Victory seems certain for Erebor on the front line, so it's not looking good for Lindon at this point, unless they've got some hidden units that they can commit late on, but somehow I doubt that. Stuff like the Wands of Alostirian are already forward, the cavalry is already doing its thing. Erebor still have a lot of quality. Uruk-hai crossbows still with a bit of ammunition. I mean, they're going to be reliant on that Isengard to get the business done. That's why they should probably stop focusing on Lindon and hitting Lindon in the back and instead trying to go after Erebor. I think this has probably been the difference maker. If Erebor do go on to win this battle, I think a big part of that is Isengard have taken advantage of what Lindon have been doing, and there's nothing wrong with that, but tunnel vision toward Lindon a little bit too much, I think, from Isengard. Both times they hit Lindon in the back when they set themselves up to attack Erebor. And that may yet end up delivering victory to one of the two Dwarven factions that started the battle. Khazad Dum started as Kings of the Hill. Erebor may very well finish as them. A crown for each of the survivors, I say. 29 Nazkai is not really enough to be the difference maker either. I mean, the trolls are moving in with the Uruk-hai crossbows, but Axguard of Erebor ideally placed, really, as troll killers, especially in this version of the game, and falling away pretty quickly. But they have been surrounded. Isengard may very well win over here. There's still the small matter of the wargs as well, although you can see some cavalry went charging through the stakes, but it was Lindon cavalry earlier on. Looks like a few Horse Lords of Ulmo as well, that's a bit unfortunate. Nazkai, defeat is a distinct possibility, 2 depleted. The Dragon Slayers outnumbering them. Dragon Slayers also have a little bit of backup from some out of ammo crossbows as well, just adding to the numbers discrepancy that Isengard now face. And surely now, what remains of Lindon and Isengard have to pool their resources, but there's not a lot of resources left. I mean, Nolder and Blade Masters, 15 of them is still significant, but a worthy foe is what they're facing off against in the Highborns of Erebor, and indeed the Highborns do have the numbers advantage there. There goes, I believe, the Isengard General. Isengard's morale, I mean, when you're talking about this amount of units that are left, it does tend to be stronger units that are not going to rout quite so easily. But then again, crossbows, the Axguard of Erebor fighting their way out. It does look as though Erebor are going to be the winners from here, if you had to guess, but 33 Harlanded infantry cresting around the corner. That's not nothing. As we said, if it's melee only, Lindon do have a tendency to really be able to lean on that high melee defense, but numbers wise I think they need a little bit more if they've got something else sequestered away, other than those Wands of Alostirian. I don't believe they do. 82 Ironfoot crossbows, Uruk-hai infantry routing, 2 Nazkai. Yeah, stuff like 18 Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin is going to be a little bit much to deal with, I think. Balance of forces is evenly matched. Nolder and Blade Masters fighting the Highborns to a standstill, and the Highborns sort of getting on the interior of a surround, so it's not ideal for them, but elsewhere, Wands of Alostirian not being allowed to hide away at the back just in case victory does become a possibility later on, the Ironfoot crossbows finishing them off. There goes the Lindon General as well. Lindon Cavalry, 4 Lindon Scouts do reveal themselves, a unit which can hide anywhere. They are a pretty weak unit of cavalry though, and in this version of the game, as I've mentioned, single HP cavalry, especially entry-level lancers whose charge is not even that impactful either, not the best. You can see they were actually shaken as a result of getting anywhere near melee with some of the better Dwarven units. But it is close here. That was a decent charge, that as well, against the Ironfoot crossbows. Tumbling numbers.
Lindon Scouts need to do hit and run though. Can the Lindon Scouts be the ones to win this fight? 42 of them. How many charges do they have left in them? They can finish off those Ironfoot crossbows. If they get into melee for any length of time against the Dragon Slayers, though, they are in massive trouble. There's also the small matter of Blacklocks. I think it's too much heavy lifting for the Scouts alone to do. There goes the General, though. It would be quite something if Lindon were able to win this, considering the betrayals they've suffered. And you could argue in some ways the engagements they've chosen have been less than ideal, but yeah, the Noldorin Blademaster's going to win this. It's because there's 2 units of them, in all fairness. That I did not realise. Crossbow bolt thudding into 1. There's still about 15 Noldorin Blademasters remaining and 44 Lindon Scouts. Crunching into those crossbows and finishing them off. Isengard of Erebor will be very good in melee against cavalry like this as well, though, of course. Dragon Slayers have taken a real beating at the hands of these 4 Lindon Scouts as well, so as is very often the way, a unit revealing itself late on is going to try and make the difference. They really need to do something about these Noldorin Blademasters as well, because slowly but surely Erebor's chances are ebbing away, actually. It's still entirely dependent on those 4 Lindon Scouts landing good charges and not losing too many of their riders per hit. But if they can do that, I think they may have a chance. Those axe throwers also need to get into melee after finishing Isengard off. Noldorin Blademasters trying to flee the scene now. 4 of them remain. I don't really think there's much point in that though, because either you can continue the melee engagement and give the cavalry backs to hit, or you may save them from like the initial death, but I don't know. There is enough room for the cavalry to be used up here on the hill. The last stand in a siege like this is not always so kind to cavalry in terms of the room that you have. That looked like a fairly decent charge. Only 5 Isengard of Erebor remain. There's still 1 Ironfoot Hammerguard. He's trying to nibble away at that cavalry as best as he's able. And try and finish off the Noldorin Blademasters with their heavy axemen. But in doing so, they are going to give... They're too disparate. I think they needed to consolidate here against the 4 Lindon Scouts, make it more difficult for the Scouts to completely eliminate all of these disparate units. As a result, I think Lindon might well have turned this around in the 4th quarter. It's a rare enough thing. Lindon in this version of the game. Their weaknesses were on display here as well. Noldorin Blademasters, still 4 of them remain. If it comes down to a pure melee tussle at this point, 4 Lindon Scouts still need to land a couple of charges, I think, before I would be comfortable in saying 4 Noldorin Blademasters would be enough to see them over the line. But we shall see. They are on the way across. There's still that 1 Ironfoot Hammerguard who actually managed to kill off one of the Noldorin Blademasters on the approach. Landing a charge on this 1 cavalryman is going to be difficult. Awkward staring. That weird cavalry bug. 4 Lindon Scouts landing hits. It's a fairly interesting little fight though. 2 Noldorin Blademasters against a Dragon Slayer of Ered Mithrin. I think surely the damage of those 2 Noldorin Blademasters will be too much. 2 dwarves remain, and that was an impressive turnaround, that, because I think from here Lindon will win. Yeah, that 1 Hammerguardsman I think was killed in the midst of all that. And there we have it, very, very close indeed. I think Lindon can feel quite vindicated from that victory as well, honestly. Because that was... with the betrayals that they suffered at Isengard's hands twice, arguably the first time was a betrayal. There was no guarantee that there was an alliance on, but twice they had to deal with that. And, you know, they managed to rally in the late game and they still had enough. Obviously, sequestering a unit away and bringing it in for the late game is tried and tested, but it's very risky for that to be 4 Lindon Scouts because, of course, they are not the sturdiest unit, and it was in this situation where there were no ranged attacks, there wasn't really any dedicated anti-cavalry. Heavy axemen were the closest thing that Erebor had, that they were able to be so decisive in the late game. But fair play to Lindon there. Fair play to everyone else as well. Isengard trying to bring victory to them late on, but ultimately their betrayals, like I said, they could have waited a little bit longer. I think that may have been the key. Or they needed to coordinate with Erebor. They needed to choose a more steadfast ally at some point rather than just, flying by the seat of their pants, really, as it seemed like they were doing. Erebor themselves tried to dig in, and it was nearly enough. It perhaps should have been enough, but again, if you paint a target on your back a little bit too early, like maybe they did, that little bit of extra damage. I mean, the margins were so fine here that it's hard to really say that was the reason, but it's the closest thing I can come up with. Of course, Khazad Dum died a long time ago, it feels like now, but that was to be expected. They got the highest kill counts, again, as to be expected, but it was the position they put themselves in was always going to be, we're either going to win heroically against all 6 of our opponents, or we're going to die with the highest kills, and it was the latter. I mean, let's see what did the damage for them. Iron Watch, unsurprisingly, being incredibly effective given the map and the situation, 451. Catapults maybe not quite as much as they were hoping for. Isengard did snipe out one of them. Still got 100 kills, which is not too bad. Again, pressure put on Isengard early. The rest of the army slightly lower end because of the high-end skirmishing that they wanted to do, but 326 on Warriors of Khazad Dum is also very impressive. Add in men again, 2 units of Iron Watch, one of which getting 510, which is impressive. Even 260 is fine. Plenty of units breaking 100 as well, but of course, impressive kill counts are all well and good, but the free-for-alls they're meant to be these kind of interesting ebbing and flowing affairs where alliances are made and broken. Khazad Dum never had any allies, of course, really. Their ballista was allowed to fire a little bit into Erebor as Erebor took up their position at the summit of the hill, but other than that, they never really had any friends, whereas the other 3, it really was a sort of back and forth, a very winding affair indeed. But yes, big thank you to Y2K for reminding me of this one. I've had this one for a while, of course, and again, this is going to be one of the final battles that we see on this version of the game. And this one, maybe in terms of like the actual outcome of it, was a far closer affair than the one we saw on Khazad Dum a few weeks ago. So Y2K was correct in those terms, and nice to see a free-for-all as well. As I mentioned, this is not necessarily the very last battle that we see on this old version of the game. It may very well be that we do see the occasional battle from this patch pop up here and there. But again, it's the sort of thing that is being phased out and there are no guarantees. As for what's coming up next, I'm not sure, because this, in terms of scheduling, is the one that I'm putting at the end of what I've currently recorded. For reference, there is one that I haven't recorded yet, but it'll be before this one on the new patch. It'll be Angmar against the Dunedain. Following on from that, I have actually completely exhausted my backlog at this point, but I think that's fine, because I think I've just about managed to cover the 3-week period away that I think I'm going to be subjected to once more. But yeah, we'll see on that one. Everything is still a bit up in the air with regards to that, but we'll see what happens. Big thank you to Y2K for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players for being a part of this one, even if it was a fair time ago now, back in January. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.